will try to do about 15 minutes of this. And because of the short time, we had some questions, but really wanted to open it up to the audience.
I may be a little bit of a cynical economist, but I'm a little bit worried, actually, especially by Peter Evans and Dr. Shu's presentations. I mean, platforms want to do a great job, but basically you are presenting a model in which decarbonization, the responsibility for decarbonization is given completely to private platforms. And I'm afraid that their incentives might not always be completely aligned with what we would call social welfare. So for instance, if I'm a platform selling trips, vacations, you come on my platform and you tell me, oh, I'd like to go and spend vacations in Australia. I will tell you, oh, this airline is a little bit better, in terms of green and so on. And I might have very little incentive to tell you, well, maybe you could take the train and go to a very nice place about 100 kilometers away from from where you live. And I'm not sure exactly, what you see is the role of governments in other authorities in supervising exactly the way platforms are helping with decarbonization.
Good question. I would say first that we shouldn't just limit our focus on carbon. There are many other externalities, which I try to point out. We're flooding our landfills with material. The other is the oceans with plastics. And I think the point I was trying to make is platforms are just machines to advance the linear economy, and they need to step back and think about the broader externalities that they're creating. But they actually can be quite efficient in matching and helping to address some of these issues. And I think my last slide pointed out that in some instances, we can have private companies launch and orchestrate the market, but that's probably not the only model. And I think that in some cases, we need public-private partnerships. And in some instances, the government may have to come in and actually provide the backstop financing because there's a complete market failure and the only way to launch it. I think the only point is that governments should consider platforms as part of their policy suite as they make these interventions, because platforms can provide tremendous governance and they're proven to be quite efficient in this matching, discovery, and all these other elements. So totally agree with you that government intervention is often necessary to solve these market failures, but don't forget the platforms as part of the solution.
I just want to quickly add that just like Professor Liu in the first session basically says that the carbon markets, at least in China, is a highly policy influential world. Without policy, without governments, it won't happen. Even, especially as Professor Bolton was basically mentioning, we need a global market. I mean, it's just impossible that we do it without all the major emitters, the governments work together on that. So that in that sense, I totally agree that platform is one of the solutions that has, as I mentioned, has largely been untapped. That we could, basically help.
Oh, actually, I was wondering, Professor Kramer, if we could make this a bit of reverse two-way logistics here and ask you, if you agree with the premise that there are many advantages and benefits of leveraging, mechanisms of the platform, but you have identified potential issues. How would you propose the solution to be?
Just let me give you one example, because but I do think it's going to have to be very specific. So for instance, I think it was Mr. Evans who spoke about the steel the platform which helped resell used steel. Now, clearly, this is something which is important. I just would be worried about the fact of having, it seems to me that's the kind of market in which you probably would be better off with several platforms and not just one. I'm afraid that if you don't have a little bit of a proactive public policy, there would be one platform which would basically be in charge of designing the standards, organizing the markets, and that we, by focusing too much on, oh, that's good, we would encourage monopolization of that market, which probably would be better off using some competition. It doesn't mean that I don't admire, the entrepreneur who had the idea of organizing this market. So I think they're just difficult kind of balancing acts which we need to do in this case.
Just to respond, the OECD just had a meeting in Paris last week, and they issued a paper on circular economy and competition policy. So they're obviously thinking about this. What I found really interesting about the paper is they didn't even mention marketplaces and platforms. And in my view, actually, a platform that helps orchestrate and solve externalities is better than no platform at all. So,
yeah, this is for Professor Wen. It actually follows up a bit on our lunch conversation, but I was fascinated by one chart you had, which talked about the efficiency gains for applying AI. But I'd say more generally, you're probably talking about digitization really at the SMEs. And so the amount of efficiency gain you had suggests that there must be incredible inefficiency currently. And maybe just talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a lot of opportunity that isn't just AI, but covers a lot of the sort of points of this audience.
Sure. So thanks for the question. Actually, the chart I showed, actually, I make the assumption that AI will play an important role for digital transformation for SMEs, for platforms, and for infrastructures. So that's my untold assumption is I have to use AI to help me to address that challenges. And there's a lot of inefficiency, especially in the physical space or infrastructure management, what I call mission critical infrastructures. And those are the areas that have a lot of low-hanging fruits one can work on. And what the case in point I make is for data center, because we tend to believe data center is a high-tech facility. But when we go inside there, actually what we observe is actually a lot of legacy challenges and issues, because data center often have a shelf life of 10 to 15 years. A lot of legacy issues are there. A lot of low-hanging fruits over there can be addressed using latest technology. So I hope that, actually, if you're interested, there was some market study report by Accenture, I believe. They actually tried to quantify the amount of efficiency improvement in terms of energy, in terms of productivity, in terms of different metrics one can reap by using more advanced digital tools for digital transformation. I'll send you that report later. Thanks.
Can I add one comment? So I was fascinated by Professor Wen's presentation. I do have a comment that you showed the efficiency gains in terms of energy use, but I think a better indicator might be emissions, because if our electricity are all renewable, energy uses a lot of energy. Probably it's not a big deal from a sustainability point of view. But of course, from cost point of view, you still need to consider energy use, right? So just comment.
Sure, I totally agree with Prof. Xu's comment about the energy and the carbon are two related but not 100% correlated metrics one can look at when you operate a data center. But often challenges now, data center has been put into the spotlight because of the carbon emission. For example, in Singapore's context, we have this moratorium because we have to meet the COP26 accord Singapore signed up. And although even we have the capability, we can build more data centers, and cost is not the issue because people can pay high premium for using data center in Singapore.
Oh, so I think over there.
I'm James from the Ant Group, the ESG office. I have questions for Dr. Liu and maybe Peter. Actually, in Dr. Margin's presentation, he talking about there are numerous standards in terms of disclosure of the ESG things. But in this session, we're talking about like the market initiative that can provide innovative solutions. I'm curious that with Alibaba, we're creating a Scope 3 Plus initiative. I think it's super creative, and it means a lot in the domestic market. I'm not sure, but when we're talking about in the global context, we see there's a lot of initiatives in Europe. In Peter's presentation, there's a lot of European companies, and the United States, and maybe in Singapore, I'm not sure. I do think whether this model from the bottom-up solution could be come up with a kind of global best practice or global standards, because I think this is the carbon issue is kind of global threat. I think that in terms, when we're talking about the cross-border trade, I am not sure whether the EU consumer, when they purchase in Alibaba e-commerce platform, they could get this carbon credit or something that also related incentives. Because when we're talking about like this initiatives, I don't think there should come up with some more trade barriers instead of an effort of harmonization in this regard. Thank you.
I'll quickly. Thanks for the question. I mean, actually, I was making a note about Dr. Ma's taxonomy. I think that it is a top-down and bottom-up process, and the taxonomy actually offers a great system for us not to go everywhere, but we focus more on how to get the calculation right, or how to get the calculation state of art, so that the numbers of decarbonization, however we calculate it, it is actually contributing to real decarbonization. It's not perfect. For example, the standard is actually asking, the golden standard is you have to use LCA life cycle assessment numbers, but it also says that in the case that you really don't have it, but if you can show that with what we call attributional methods, but also showing that this is the best that it should still be taken as useful. So that's what we think that it could be. I mean, we can act. That's also why we're not waiting until it's all perfect. After a year, 1.5 years of practice, we reach out to WBCSD and try to see that whether we can shorten this, cycle of innovation. But what is very important is what many of us have mentioned: the transparency reporting. I forgot to mention that next month in our annual ESG report, we'll for the first time disclose our Scope 3 plus decarbonization. All the numbers there are audited by a third-party auditor. So we believe we're probably one of the, probably the first company doing that. And I mean, the numbers are not going to be perfect, but by disclosing all of these numbers and methods behind, we hope that this is making contribution for it to grow. And I mean, in the meantime, what Dr. Ma was doing internationally, I think that's, that avoid emission framework, all of these are giving us this guiding framework that our efforts are going to be efficient, effective towards the common goal.
But the thing that I got most excited about is this idea that the work that a big platform like Alibaba or Amazon Business can provide is the trust in the certification, so that the smaller companies that don't have the wherewithal to know what kind of emissions that they're creating, but if they buy from that platform, they can get that data, and that helps them with understanding their carbon footprint and their reporting. So I think there's a huge efficiency gain from that and a behavioral potential impact. So from all the conversations we've had today, I think that is actually a benefit that the platform provide, that both policymakers and the companies that are trying to understand how to comply and meet their ESG requirements, that's a big opportunity, especially if that trust factor can be certified, not just once, but on an ongoing basis.
And actually also going back to Dr. Ma's question on how we can help SMEs, because all of these decarbonization Scope 3 plus is the total of someone else's Scope 1, 2, 3. And by doing this, we're basically helping the whole ecosystem knowing how much we're doing. This is not hiding that Scope 3 for Alibaba is still very difficult, especially with our increasing logistics service. both domestically, internationally.
Well, if I can add, that actually gets into ecosystem strategy. So what ecosystem do you belong to? Does that ecosystem provide you with a competitive advantage, not just in terms of efficient products, but also in reporting, is, I think, a big deal and will become very important in the future.
And it seems like that ecosystem and the trust issue means that it actually makes a organizer or a coordinator even more important, especially a trusted one. But maybe I'll dovetail that into a question for Professor Xu, which is, as someone who hasn't, worked on these systems, if I hear your, presentation, it seems like this is a very monumental problem to solve. You've proposed, some solutions, but given what Professor Bolton said about the timeline that we're facing right now for net zero, or 1.5, it seems like, do you have any idea of what the timeline is for even getting some of these ecosystems or data spaces, these trustworthy systems set up to do this amount of, carbon footprinting?
That's a very good question. So I think in terms of addressing the trust issue in this space, there are two layers. First is the technological layer, where, as I showed earlier, all those technologies are ready, and we can build the platform or technology solutions relatively easily. But another layer is to, I guess, technology cannot solve everything. We need the people to participate, to use those technologies. I think that's the biggest challenge. And I don't know how fast we can engage people using those data space technology. That's a lot of there are a lot of behavior issues, and I don't know. I think it's it's a biggest challenge. Technology is easier.
Great. Well,
Quickly,
I think we have time.
This goes back to Professor Parker's question, and I do want to go to Stefan. Your session tomorrow, complexity, and potentially finding some solutions over there.
I think we do have time for maybe two more questions. So I think Professor Bolton has a question there.
I'm not sure I have a question, but more I want to steer the conversation to plastic. I thought the example of BMW using recycling plastic was very interesting. I want to put that a little bit into context and also link it to Scope 3 Plus and what Alibaba is doing. So the context is, it seems there's talk of a global agreement on plastic. So with that in mind, if that's going to happen, recycling is going to be of the first order, because that global agreement will take the form of reducing substantially the supply of new plastic. The number one company in the world for plastic waste, Coca-Cola. Number two, Pepsi-Cola. Coca-Cola has had several shareholder resolutions asking Coca-Cola to commit to reduce its reliance on plastic. Coca-Cola has responded to those shareholder resolutions. He's made an effort, but it's still far too little. So how do you see the role of a platform like Alibaba going towards engagement with Scope 3 Plus? How can you coordinate that with shareholder engagement?
I guess that's to me. I mentioned one of these cases of this decarbonization friendly action. And in that one, I have to say that we focus more on carbon. Plastic was not an explicit goal there. There might be some synergies, but in my view, for plastic kind of problem, the effort is definitely not up to to what's needed. And we know that there's the other alliances like WPCSD. There's this Consumer Goods Forum, where our CEO Daniel is actually one of the co-chairs right now. Together, with Coca-Cola's CEO. And what we, the last 2 years, or mostly the last year, this group in China has been promoting the golden principles of plastic, of design with plastic products in China. I think that's one of the first steps in applying what CGF has identified internationally of how packaging should be done, how plastic could be reduced. But to my, as an environmental scientist by training, I don't think it's up to the challenge yet. So that's as far as much that I know right now. We are trying to not just Coca-Cola, with our many other lines of businesses, including offline retail, and with this kind of plastic bags, all of these issues. But I mean, I think we have to promote that issue up to the same level as carbon. As a, again, ecologist by training, biodiversity, there's so many other issues, but we just have to keep trying. I mean, I don't have any much more to say for now.
Okay, great. And I think in the interest of time and trying to get everyone out of here by 6, don't want hungry people, we will just end it there, and then we'll have Martin Reeves close this out.